thinkers. Now, I've been known to harp about the need for simplifying your brand story. Harp is probably an understatement. Ideally, the goal is to get it down to 8 words or less. At Renegade, we tend to think of these words as public-facing, dubbing them your purpose-driven story statement, like, say, on the case for case paper, which expresses its enduring commitment to customer service and customer satisfaction. If you want to study that one, you can go back to episode 157 with Simon Schaefer Goldman. Anyway, these phrases can be the umbrella that ties all the marketing together to all your targets, from employees to customers to prospects and partners. Okay. But this focus on simplifying your brand story can actually predate these carefully crafted phrases. I was reminded of this in last week's Super Huddle by entrepreneur David Friend. Friend has started 6 companies, including Carbonite and Wasabi. Before he invests a penny, he makes sure he can describe the company in the space of a billboard headline. So for Carbonite, before he put money into it, he only needed 2 words: easy backup. For Wasabi, the company he's chairing now, he needed 3 words: hot cloud storage. Again, 2 technology companies, incredibly simple story. The power of having such a clear positioning cannot be underestimated, especially if you operate in a tech space that is usually filled with speeds and feeds and jargon that only engineers can understand. Which brings us to today's guest, Heidi Bullock, the CMO of Tealium, who promises to share her messaging simplification journey and more. Before joining Tealium in October 2019, Heidi was the CMO of Engagio, and before that, the Group Vice President of Marketing at Marketo. So welcome, Heidi. I've got to turn off my phones like a moron. How about that?
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing? How are things in California?
They're great. I have no complaints.
Well, all right. Now, so let's before we dig into your journey at Tealium, I noticed you were a molecular biology major in college. So how come you're not in a research lab working on genetic engineering?
So I love people. And so I found the lab to be a little bit, you're isolated, but I would say that I feel like marketing is the science of people. So a lot of what I feel like I studied and learned in college, I actually apply a lot today, to be honest.
Well, and certainly it's got to give you some creds with the dev team.
Absolutely.
Right. So yeah, it's not like you're because marketers that don't always have the reputation for really understanding how this stuff works or even being curious about it. So that's a leg up for you. Okay. So we're going to fast forward to October 19 when you arrived at Tealium. Why am I struggling with that? What was your mandate?
Yeah, so my mandate was really simple when I joined the company. It was, hey, we're doing really well, but we want to grow, and we want to grow more efficiently than we have historically. So as you know, a lot of companies, what takes you from 0 to 10 million, 10 to 40, they're different things, right? And you can be really lucky, have a great product market fit, and things can happen relatively organically. But I think when I joined Tealium, we were just over 100 million in ARR. And so my mandate was grow the business. And so there, as many of the folks listening today know, there's different approaches you can have to that. And today I'm going to walk through some of kind of the key ones that I took a look at right away to help do that.
So you're at 100 million, and the goal is, I'm imagining, $500 million or something like that. Where do you even start because growth there's so many different ways of growing an organization. Where did you start?
Yeah, so I started with 2 things, and I agree with you. I think it could be very overwhelming because there are a lot of levers, but I really focused in on 2. I focused in on who we were selling to today, currently, and was that the best for the company? Meaning, was it the most efficient? Were those the best bets? Did our sales team, were we relying primarily on inbound, or did we have a nice target account focus. That was one. And two is making sure our story made sense and was simple. Because in a lot of cases, and you touched on this earlier, at many tech companies, you can meet somebody in an elevator, and if they're talking to you for 10 minutes or more about what the company does, I mean, that's just not where it needed to be. So it was really around making sure we had an efficient go-to-market model and really simplifying the story. That's where I focused on.
So got it. All right. So we've got who and what do we say is sort of those two components. So let's reverse those for the purposes of this and start with story. What was that process? Where did you begin?
Yeah, the process that I followed was I came in and I always start with, let's not assume everything is terrible. Because in most cases, if you've got to that level of growth, there's something that has been working well. But I took a look at, obviously, the website. That's a great place to start. I asked a lot of people within the company, partners, customers, walk me through what Tealium does and what you get excited about. And what I ultimately look for is, are there common themes, or are people consistent? And what I was expecting and what I saw was there wasn't consistency. and a lot of people, they couldn't really tell me succinctly what Tealium did. It's like, oh, well, Tealium has a CDP. Tealium has a great history of tag management. They help us with data management. They help us with customer experiences, but it was all over the board. So I knew right away I needed to come in and have a great story externally, of course, but also equally important is the internal marketing and making sure that our sales team, our revenue teams, so customer success included, we had a really good story that we all felt comfortable telling.
So totally agree with the need to get it right, get it simplified as we started at the top of the hour. But how do we do this? Where do we start?
Yeah. So I basically took a look at, I like starting with customers because, again, they're the ones that buy the product. And I really just like doing interviews with them first and saying, where do you find value? What do you use the product for every day? What is the pain? What is the pain that this product helps you address? And just starting with some of those key questions. And what I did is I looked at, probably a series of, I think I talked to about 30 customers, different verticals, different sizes. And I started to pick up on some key themes. Now, and of course, with a technical product, they're going to get into some nuances. But across the board, I started to see that, certain kind of levels of conversation would float to the top. And that's really what I wanted to do. And to be fair, as I said, I also would speak to partners in addition to customers. And internal folks too, like some of the sales consultants and people that just had a lot of engagement in the sales process, and really starting to look for themes and then taking a step back and saying, what is the story that I want to tell and what makes sense? But I really like kind of seeing what people tell me, come back with first. But then, and this is something that I think no one is ever going to tell you the perfect story. Then as a marketer, you have to say, okay, great. I kind of have the clay, and now how am I going to form that story? And so at the highest level, we really centered on Tealium connects data so you can better connect to your customers. There's nothing better than that, right? All of us want to have those one-to-one personalized conversations, but most of us can't do that at scale. And so we really do that through data. And that was the high-level story. And then basically I structured different tiers, and that story would ultimately be a little bit different depending on the level of person you're speaking with, and also like how long you obviously knew that relationship or had that relationship with that person for. So if at the high level, like if I'm speaking to you, I can say that. But if I've known a customer for a long time, we can get into more detail.
So it feels like you condensed a lot there, which I appreciate, but I want to make sure. So you went from 30 customer interviews.
Yep.
Are you doing this on your own? You're working with an agency?
So I would love to say that I worked with an agency on it, but for me, again, because I was new, I really wanted to do it myself, and I wanted to hear what people had to say. And we recorded that information. I also worked with my product marketing team. They helped me out on that as well. And I'll say that for some people, they use different tools. Like I know a lot of the listeners probably use a tool Gong, and you can even use something like that. Or even your SDR team. There are different ways. You don't necessarily have to go spend tons of money and time with an agency. It's great if you can do that, but I actually really wanted to hear what people had to say myself.
I totally get it. And it makes, I mean, I think it's great because you're hearing, first of all, those potentially are testimonials later on. These are relationships that you can adopt. They're the beginning of a customer advisory board. If you don't have one, there's a lot of reasons for a new CMO to directly speak with their best clients, and because you just don't know what they're going to say. And because you're in marketing as opposed to other areas, they may actually give you the truth.
That's right. And what's nice is, like, who doesn't want to have somebody from a company where you spend, a lot of your time and day in their products reach out to you? I mean, I think people were really happy to hear from me. And that was actually exciting. But you're right, like other things would surface as well. And just getting their sentiment around, if they felt that we were, a proactive company. Did they feel that we had a good roadmap? Well, a lot of other conversations come out of it. So I personally think it's a really good thing to do yourself or with your immediate team, and then go over those conversations.
And do you have, was there an aha moment for you?
Yes, there was an aha moment, because I think what I realized is that a lot of the customers that had been customers for a long period of time thought of us one particular way, where within the company, we thought of ourselves very differently. Like I found that they thought, great, we've used Tealium forever for, great tag management systems, but not everybody was aware of all the other solutions and capabilities that we had. And that I had a feeling about, but these conversations really solidified that fact.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And that is such an interesting challenge, and one that became so important during the pandemic when it was so difficult to get new clients. You really had to lean into your current clients and hope that you could upsell them on that, because they weren't taking advantages of all the things the product could do. So again,
Right.
probably very timely given the fact that you started just pre-COVID, but being able to identify the fact that your customers don't know all the things that your products can do. And
They don't. And I love that you said that. That's like, if people take away one thing from today, that is such an important, don't make the assumption that customers know everything about your company, stay up to date with it, and know all your products, because it evolves fast and they have day jobs. They don't wake up thinking about your company, soup to nuts. And so I think it's a really important just reminder for marketers that customers, I always equate it to a marriage. It's like the work kicks in once you're married, and it's like you almost have to try harder. You have to try harder to communicate, be interesting, be engaging, and that's something that really surfaced in these conversations.
Got it. Okay, we're going to take a quick break while I babble on about, babble is the wrong term, while I spend a little time talking about CMO Huddles, which we launched CMO Huddles in 2020. It's a subscription-only, invitation-only service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described a huddle as a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. We just had our semi-annual super huddle really just like recently, and had a feature 3 different CEOs and talked about that CEO-CMO relationship and how important that is. Anyway, if you're a B2B CMO that can share and care with the best of them, visit cmohuddles.com. Okay, we're back. And we're talking about how you went through your own discovery process and the power of doing that and talking to your customers. We talked about the aha moment of sort of realizing that your customers don't know everything that your product can do. So once you sort of recognize that they didn't know it, how do you go about saying, well, gee, this guy doesn't know about this, and this guy doesn't know about this, and sort of narrowing the focus of the conversation?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it starts with being able to tell a compelling story clearly, right? That I really kind of like following the brand ladder structure. And also, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and really addressing the why first. And that was probably something that I spent a lot of time doing internal marketing on, talking about at company meetings and really explaining, I think all of us can fall in love with technology and the nuances. And I myself love it. But I think at the end of the day, your customers and potential customers have a problem they're trying to solve. And it's making sure that that story is compelling and clear. So that's part one. And then two, your question, how can they be aware of it? I mean, that's just a marketer's job, right? Is making sure that we're engaging with them at the right time. And so they become aware of those things. And I think that's something that I think a lot about and really creating these kind of customer moments. So it's not necessarily as interruptive. I'm a big fan of marketing in app as an example. And that's something that we've really started doing more of at Tealium. So that way, somebody's in their workflow. If I want them to know about something, I can highlight it when they're logging in versus sending them a barrage of emails, just as an example. So I think that's our job really is to have the data on customers and know, when they're ready for something and when it makes sense to tell them that story.
Okay, I want to go back to a couple of things that you said, and I want to make sure, clarify the brand ladder.
Yeah, so the brand ladder is pretty cool. It really starts with an emotional benefit going all the way down to product benefits and then product attributes. That's kind of the simplest way of describing it. And what's interesting is it's like, how does a consumer or a customer feel about your brand? What is that emotion? Do they feel safe? Do they feel educated? Do they feel safe? For me, like one of the things that I thought about with Tealium is I want people to feel like we're sort of the smart, trusted friend. It's almost like that friend you picture in college and you're like, I need help with my physics lab. And that's the friend that you go to and they help you and you get the answer and then you're kind of on with your day. And so I think it's really important, really honing in on what is that emotion and feeling first, because that you want your story to convey that. And then ultimately, you can sort of go down the ladder. And then what are the product benefits that support that? Does your product make something faster? Does it make it easier? Does it make it cheaper? And then you can get into the specifics of the product. And with that ladder, a really great thing for people to do is you can map, at the highest level, it's probably the executive that you're speaking to that may care about the quick or the emotional answer. Look, I just need to save time. I need to improve my bottom line. I need to make sure that I'm improving retention this year. They care about that. And as you move down in who you're speaking with, the people will care about different things. So I love this exercise because often internally, I find that people, especially the sales team or CS team, could have questions like, what do I talk about when? And I think that this kind of framework is very helpful because each ladder, each kind of rung matters, but it's a clear structure to know, okay, if I'm speaking to an executive, I don't maybe need to get into little product features. I mean, I need to really talk about the value. I need to talk about the things they care about. But if I'm talking to the senior manager of IT, that's going to be a different set of things I'm discussing. So I think that's an amazing framework that people can use.
Okay, there are several things to break down, and hopefully I'll remember them all. Let's go back. You've mentioned talking internally, and I want to understand the process here. So you get to this point where you have the insight in what you believe is the sort of what right story, if you will, on the highest level. What point are you involving your internal audience with your hypothesis and beyond that, once you've settled on it, how much time do you spend with your internal audience, your employees, getting them up to speed on the story?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question and something that is one of the most important things CMOs can do in making sure that the story is clear internally. And so once we got, I would say, a draft of our updated pitch deck, our story, we felt good about it. I also reviewed it with analysts. I like doing that as well, and some trusted partners. Just again, so it's not just like, hey, Heidi and her team put this together in a vacuum and this is what we're going with. I like to have evidence that shows, yeah, people, it resonates, it checks out. And so then my process was meeting with my executive team and reviewing it with them, collecting their feedback. And once we got it to a place where they felt bought in, they liked it. My chief revenue officer's like, yep, this works for me. My CEO, my CTO. Then ultimately, great. Now, how are we going to roll this out? And so we have a really great process at Tealium where we have what's called sales enablement training every week. And so we really rolled it out on that call, and I presented it just like for the first time. So it's almost like people are hearing it and becoming, wow, this is the story. This is exciting. And then we made sure to really certify people on the story. So that's actually something people have to go through. They pitch it and they have to either ideally they pass telling the story or they get to do it again. And it's just the most critical thing, because as you know, people don't necessarily remember facts, but they remember a story. So we've got to get this right. And I think a lot of people, once you get it as a marketer, you're ready to go run off to the races, but you can't skip the step of the buy-in, taking people along in the journey with you, and making sure that people are certified internally. And I'm going to tell you, that doesn't happen in a week. This was a quarter. Just so people have that to really, get the story bought off, with making the changes, and really making sure it was adopted. And we continue to make modifications, and we continue to make sure that people are certified, because this is something that's really important. And as you know, it's a dynamic environment. Little things can change, but the core is staying the same. And I think it's worked really well.
Okay, listeners, renegade thinkers, I really want to pause and put some punctuation points on several things. You may recall I've talked about research where we did research with 130 some odd CMOs in mid 2020. And all 80% said that internal communications were essential before launching a new campaign, but the average allowed for an internal campaign was way less than a month. And what we just heard here was 3 months to do it right. We also heard the word certify. And I want to ask you all, as you're listening to this, when you're rolling out a new brand story, if you will, are you certifying your employees? Do they actually have a course, a micro course, if you will, that they have to learn and understand and be able to play back in a way that would allow them to talk to a prospect or a customer about the brand in the same way as every other employee? I want to just put the largest punctuation point in the world on that point right there, that if you skip that step, chaos ensues.
Correct.
Because if you skip that step, you have different messages coming from every single employee, regardless of where it's not a choir anymore. It's a bunch of soloists singing something different. So speaking of that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll come right back. Okay, we're back. And we've been talking about getting to your brand story, getting it simple and clear on the highest level with an emotional hook, if you will, and then internal training and selling to get everybody to understand and be able to play it back. You mentioned the term sales enablement training, and the words feel magical to me. I want to understand what that really means. How far are we going beyond getting the language right?
Yeah, I mean, I think making sure, and when I say sales, I really mean the entire revenue organization. So sales, if you have an internal sales team, SDRs, and also your customer success team, anybody that is interfacing with a customer, I think needs to be able to tell the story. And as far as sales enablement, I mean, this is something that I just think is so critical, because your sales team, your SDRs, anyone that touches a customer, that's a brand moment, right? That is a touch point where somebody walks away either liking your company, feeling neutral, or actually not liking your company. So it's so critical to make sure that people if they're customer facing, I would even say, even if they're not, it's really important for people to have some version of the company's story that they feel comfortable telling, and sales enablement across the board. I mean, there's a lot of facets to that, as you know. I mean, that could cover a new content release, a new product release, but it needs to be ongoing. Something that I really am a big fan of is, learning. It's not set and forget it. To be good at all of our jobs, it's something that's continuous. And so having a process in place where sales and revenue facing teams can continue to learn, be certified, that just keeps everybody, I think, to your point, it's a lovely choir, and it's not, some terrible band that nobody wants to listen to.
So we've got the message, we've got internal buy-in, you've got analysts sort of as proof of concept, and you've got executive teams. Now, how do you roll this out?
Yeah, so I rolled it out as a very simple slide deck. And I had several slides in the beginning that were sort of almost if somebody needed to put like a one-liner in an email, like things that maybe just were very, very simple and very basic. And then the next kind of section of the deck just went into the story. And I'm a big believer that everyone should be able to tell a story, and it makes it just more fun too. And so the rest of the deck was really the story. And it was, what has evolved today in business that makes us have to think about customer data differently, and making sure that we have a great strategy so we can create wonderful experiences for our buyers. So as companies, we grow and we keep our customers. And so I think it was having that slide deck that people can refer to. And I will say every slide's annotated so people can learn to tell the story, and then they have to practice it. And as I said, they get certified on it. And that was really it. I mean, and then we made sure that certain aspects, of course, are consistent across all our marketing. But I think that's something that we use a tool called HighSpot. And so we keep all our resources there, and we are very, it's wonderful because we can make sure that our sales team's accessing it and it's in a consistent place. Because, at many companies, if something's in a Google Drive where no one knows where it is, no one's looking at it. So we need to make sure that's a big part of enablement too, is making sure people always know where to go.
Okay. So we've got our sales guys, everybody's geared up. How do you bring it to market?
Yeah, so I think as far as bringing it to market, we had a date, and everybody, if they were in a deal moving forward, that's the story they tell. That's the story. I worked with my PR organization on making sure we led with certain things. Any outward facing activity, there are steps in this document, and that's what people operated with. We updated our website. All the customer facing areas really kind of had this new statement about we connect data so you can connect to your customers. We looked at social, all those key elements. So really website, social, working with our PR organization, our revenue teams. Those were the key ones. And I guess what I would tell people, we had a really nice, almost like if you're launching a new product, that was sort of the process that we followed. So there was a long list of things we checked and made sure we're consistent. But I think it's something that just over time, having that diligence and making sure that I just don't want people to feel scared. I feel like there's always things that you can miss, but you find them and you get it fixed right away.
So let's do a time frame, sort of. How long was it before you? So from your research, you're doing your, the 30 customer interviews. How long was it before you sort of knew you had the brand story you wanted to tell?
For me, I feel I was very lucky in that it was clear, and I would say I knew in about a month and a half.
Okay, so let's just say 2 months. And then you allowed from there, you have to develop all the stuff in order to sell it in. So at what point in the process, when did you launch the campaign internally?
Internally, it was, so I did all the work. It was about the second quarter. So the first quarter was doing the interviews, building the materials, getting the buy off. And I think the thing that took the longest, honestly, was scheduling the interviews and connecting with customers. That took the longest. And then after that, I felt like I wanted to make sure everybody is really, really focused, and we moved on this fast because my CEO is really funny. He's like, this is important, get it done quick. So,
Yeah.
and so then I think at the end of the first quarter, we had it, we felt good. And then the rollout and launch was really the beginning of the second quarter. And we timed that. One thing that I think worked well for us was our sales kickoff. So I joined in October, and our sales kickoff was the first week in February. So we wanted everything ready for that.
Right. So having a deadline was a good thing there. So you could, and you had enough time. Okay. So we do the sales kickoff, and then COVID hit.
So great. So easy.
And so then did that have a material impact on your, the customer and prospect rollout?
So for us, because what Tealium does, it's really all around, at the end of the day, it's creating great digital experiences. So for us, it almost in some cases made it easier because again, like a lot of our customers, that's what they're trying to do, and they're trying to do it better. I think the areas that we did see that what was tricky was more in like certain verticals, like travel and hospitality. That was tough.
Yeah.
That was tough. Because they were just seeing all this immense change. But I think that the folks that had been Tealium customers and using our CDP, they were in actually a great position. And then I think that there were folks that, if people hadn't gone through a digital transformation and were relying kind of on older systems or did a lot that wasn't digital and done in a personal way, that was tough. But to be honest, it didn't impact our rollout.
Right. Right. And so you just happen to be on the right side of the digital divide in this sense that being a company that enables others to work better efficiently online, and that's where the world went. You were better positioned than,
Right.
let's say, Delta Airlines or Hilton Hotels, who, no matter what they did, we're not going to get people to travel or book. Okay. So you roll it out so let's talk about it. It's been, now quite a while since that language and campaign went out there. How are you measuring and monitoring performance?
Yeah, so I'm measuring performance in a few different ways. And the first is I really like talking to my sales team. And I think if your sales team finds that the story works and they're seeing success, that's probably one of the best things. So you could say, well, how do I do that? I do it two ways. I talk to them, and that's something that I spend a lot of time talking to our sales leaders and making sure, does the story work? Are there tweaks that we need to make? And also, as I mentioned, I have a lot of nice data just because I can see what people access through our tool HighSpot. So I know if people are using our materials or not and what they're finding successful. And so that's kind of like the internal side of things. But then externally, I think that there's ways that you can see your stories resonating. And I do appreciate and like talking to analysts because I think that a lot of them will be very straightforward and they'll say, hey, this sounds like everybody else. Or, wow, this is a nice distinction that you're making. So I do kind of talk to them. I talk to also partners that I trust to get their sense of things. And then I look at data. I really try to see where we place our stories. And is it getting engagement or is it not? Is it falling flat or am I noticing that when I post a particular story, whether that's on our blog or somewhere else, I see engagement. So I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of see if a story is working or not. But the easiest thing is like, is it making your sales process easier? At the end of the day, that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make it so our story is consumable. So a customer knows what we do, great. And it makes the sales process easier and less friction. That's really a good story reduces friction.
Got it. So a lot of B2B marketers sort of look at metrics from we'll just call it inbound for a moment, the percentage of qualified leads that they are putting into pipeline, right? Just pipeline is the term that comes up as a reflection of the effectiveness, not of the story, but of their marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so and it's just that pipeline always comes up. And I'm curious, are you able to actually see a difference that this story is having on pipeline versus where how would you even sort of assess that other than, hey, say marketing is contributing 50% of a pipeline or of a forward revenue or whatever it is. Is that for you an important metric?
Yeah, I mean, pipeline is a very important metric for me. Getting back to how I can understand if our new story, what the impact was, there were a few things that I looked at as far as numbers. I looked at our SDRs with the new story. Did they get meetings easier? Did we see more meetings? And the other thing that I looked at very closely was velocity. And so, especially in a lot of B2B and specifically enterprise deals, if your, average sales cycle was, say, I'm making this up, 100 days, and you can get that down to 50, that's a big change. And so that was a big one that I looked at. I really wanted to see, hey, is it easier for SDRs to tell our stories so we can get more meetings, which I saw. And then I really saw, again, reducing friction. I wanted to see the number of, days that it takes ultimately improve. Like, I wanted to see, great, we had a meeting and we were able to create an op and close that deal in less time. So I really look at velocity.
And were you able to say, without revealing numbers, that you were able to get more meetings and increase the velocity?
Yes.
There we go. So those are easy conversations to have then. And then more meetings, more velocity. The nice thing about the velocity one is it includes that aspect of close, right? It's like, we got this deal closed. And that's the problem. Pipeline, of course, is it's not closed business. It's just pipeline.
That's right. You can have that pipeline.
So velocity is a nice measure in that if you were averaging, as you said, 100 days and you were able to cut that in half, it means that you are getting a lot more efficient although that would be incredible to increase the pipeline by velocity by 50%. But nonetheless, that makes a lot of sense because now you're talking bottom line revenue to the organization. And
one important thing for people to think about is making sure that they have a baseline first. And that was something that we thought a lot about. So if you, with any initiative, whether it's like, hey, I'm telling a new story, I'm launching something new, I always like to make sure that I know, where did velocity start in the beginning? How many meetings on average what was I seeing a week? So that way I can look at those improvements. And what's hard is sometimes people think about it later, and then it's like, oh, going back in time to get some of that data it's not always as easy as you'd like to think. So I think that's just one thing that I want to tell your audience. I think that's a really critical thing to do.
And so when we're baselining, again, what are the key questions or things that we need to make sure we are baselining?
Yeah. So I look at, what is our average number of meetings that we are getting right now with our SDR team? What's the, what does the current velocity look like through different stages of, our journey? Can I make improvements on any of those? And I have all that. We use a tool called Clary. And so I kind of have all the stages with and you can use different tools to do this, but then having kind of like, okay, this is like my benchmarks where I'm starting with, how can I make improvements there? And I think for us, again, because these are larger enterprise deals, any amount of time we can shave off the process, trust me, that's a really important thing for me. So those were mine. And I think for some people, it could be an improvement in web traffic. It's like, great, I want to see more engagement or more conversions. Maybe it's a shopping cart. I just need better conversions, but it's just like taking a look at the things that matter for your business. And for mine, velocity, retention, improvements in quality pipeline, not just pipeline. I mean, I think when I came to Tealium, we had a lot of pipeline, but I want it to be pipeline that we can close. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the big thing that's so important. It's why qualified, sort of sales qualified leads is important. But even beyond that, it's at the end of it. And what's so tricky in this is it takes a long time to close bigger deals, right? The bigger the deal, the longer it takes often. And so to be able to remember that this was a marketing sourced lead that actually closed in, it was bigger. Yeehaw, life is really good. We're running out of time. So I want to, as you think about this journey of going from looking at the brand and saying, I think we can have a clearer message out there. What would you say are sort of some of the biggest lessons learned for you that over the course of this last, I'm going to say 16 months, 18 months?
Gosh, just specific to the story, I would say that I think sometimes your first impression coming in and taking a lot of notes when you first join a company, because often you're coming in with such a fresh perspective. People haven't talked to you yet. They haven't kind of filled your head with their perspective. I think that's a really special time. And so trying to document, all of us, have a sense of like, hey, does that message make sense? Is it distinctive? Is it answering a pain? And I think kind of often like your first instinct is pretty right. And so I think taking notes on that's really important. I think talking to customers early was a good decision, just because I think it gave me a sense of really their perception. And it doesn't matter what our perception is internally. It doesn't really matter. It's what they think. And I think that was a good thing. I think something that was hard but very important was taking people along in the journey. And sometimes I think a lot of marketers, the right thing. And it's like, getting the CTO's buy-in or whomever, it may feel overwhelming, but it's essential because people don't like surprises. And I think if folks feel that they're part of that journey and they've given their input, that's something that I think it takes time. It slows things down, but you have to do it. And then I think my last learning was articulating when I felt certain milestones would be hit. Because as you said, you're not going to come in and redo the entire brand or a story in 2 weeks. It's just not, I don't think that's going to happen. If somebody's done it, that's amazing. And so I think for me, I was trying to be very clear around, we're going to start with customer interviews. We're going to be done with that in month 1. Month 2, we're going to build the materials. We're going to roll this out by our kickoff. And that was my deadline, and I had to hit it. And so I think by setting those expectations, then people, they trust your process. And that's something that I've seen in a lot of cases with so many different projects. If you don't do that, it's rough.
It's so true. It's like, that's great. It's a really good summary. It's funny. The first chapter of my first book is all about, in this CMO's periodic table. The first chapter is manage expectations. And if you don't, it's game over. Yeah. And that's just so true with it for any CMO. It's you've got to set and manage expectations for what you will and will not accomplish, how long things take, and what metrics are going to matter. Because if you don't have that, it's a very difficult climb. So, okay. Well, this has been amazing. I'm so grateful that you would spend the time with us today. So much to digest. I can't wait to look at the transcript. Lots of great things. I love, by the way, the insight of pay attention to those first few days as you're drinking from the fire hose, because you may have an insight that's really helpful, and just circle it. It's happened to me so many times doing the journey that you're describing. And I circle it. I don't share it necessarily because you curse it and you need to build an argument around it, but definitely pay attention, because you're absolutely right. That's when your senses are at their spideyest, if you will. All right. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks, Drew.
So Renegade Thinkers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Audio production is by Sam Beck. Show notes are written by Melissa Caffrey. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, or learn more about quite possibly the best B2B marketing agency in New York City, visit renegade.com. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.